Today, we are very lucky to have District Attorney Jason Anderson. You are the district attorney. Prior to that, you were a very highly respected prosecutor. I know a lot of our members spoke very highly about you when you decided to run for DA. I know you've owned your own private practice, and we are just really excited to be able to talk to you about, the things that are happening in the justice system now and how many things are changing. So thank you so much for agreeing to be here today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Alita. My pleasure. Appreciate the invite.
So one of the major things I want to talk about, or one of the maybe the most newsworthy that's just happened, is Prop 36.
Yes.
I know that you were a big advocate for it. And if you could just, briefly give an introduction or a summary, kind of in layman's terms to the listeners, about what is Prop 36.
Prop 36 is an initiative attempt to fix where legislation has lacked for probably the last 3 or 4 years. And the reason it's lacked is that back in 2014, Prop 47 took away a lot of I always call it leverage or incentives for people to stick with rehab programs. When you could no longer put people in custody, even if they failed out of rehab programs, then really there was not a whole lot of incentive there. And it's not to say bad about those individuals. Anybody who's dealing with an addiction is not going to be in a position to be able to make rational decisions in a consistent way for the period of time it takes to get off of a substance, whether it's drugs or alcohol. So what happened is that the District Attorneys Association started tracking the numbers over the last several years to see what's this increase in homelessness, and is there a tie to Prop 47 and the increase in drug use, nonviolent, simple possession and in drug use, and then the increase in fentanyl, and does that then lead to homelessness? And in fact, it does. We shared all those statistics. So Prop 36 was an attempt to try to stop that trend of homelessness increasing, because we really were no longer able to leverage anybody into rehab. So the Prop 36, the main component was twofold. Number one, if you qualify as a Prop 36 new drug offense, it could be charged as a felony. That felony would carry county prison or state prison, depending on other charges. But the option was for the defendant that if you chose rehabilitation, were successful, you don't go to jail. And actually, if you're successful, your case is dismissed, which is better than the old drug court.
Prop 36, right?
Old Prop 36 in drug court, you just stayed out of custody, you kicked your addiction, but the conviction still stood. So in this indication, the conviction actually goes away. The entire case would be dismissed at the end. And so that the jail component, the county prison or the state prison component was going to be the leverage. A lot of the critics said this is just another attempt at mass incarceration, but the difference was that it was the defendant's choice, right? Yeah. And if they wanted to do it, then everybody's going to operate towards success. The court's going to operate that way. The DA's office is going to operate that way. We realize because of the last 15 years that people are going to relapse. But unless you have the boundary to keep that person in rehab for long enough to kick the addiction, then that person's going to get turned out. They're going to end up homeless because they're going to lose all the skills. And so that's the big difference with Prop 36. The other side of that, too, I should mention, Lolita, is the theft component of it. Now, the theft component, as we all know, there is certainly a component of theft tied to drug use because you're trying to get something of value to trade to fix the addiction.
Right.
But oftentimes, it's just you just decide that you want something that isn't yours, and you're just going to repeatedly turn people into victims. And with just the site release on the theft and not being able to have the recidivist, not be able to say, okay, if you've got 2 prior convictions, we can make it a felony again. Yeah. Again, there's no leverage. It doesn't stop anybody from stealing because they just shrug their shoulders, they get a site release, and that's it. Yeah. Well, now the difference is we can actually hold people into custody. And if we look at those cases and they're just serial thieves, then we want to put them in jail and separate them from society as much as we can. But if there's a drug component, now with the felony of the recidivist theft and the addiction, then those people go back over to the rehabilitation track where they get to choose what they want to do. It's not the DA forcing you to jail or forcing you to prison or a judge doing that. It's now we've got your attention, hopefully, and it's the way old drug court used to work.
Both of those tracks, just thinking back when I was on patrol, and that was a long time ago, but 10 years ago, I was a detective in Chino Hills, and I remember after Prop 47 passed, we had a kid, I mean, he was like 22, likely had some substance abuse problems, but just a serial thief. And we had arrested him probably 4 times, and he was just right back out doing the same thing. And it was frustrating because as law enforcement, the residents, the citizens, they look at you to keep them safe.
Yes.
And they call and they get frustrated and they say, why aren't you guys doing anything? Or what happened? I thought you just arrested him. Why is he back? Or certain things. And it's like, law enforcement felt like we saw it happening. We saw Prop 47 pass and we knew it was going to be a disaster. Yeah. But you get people that look at it maybe from a perspective where they don't truly understand. And you're talking about the nuances where it seems like it's just mass incarceration
Yes.
for petty things.
Yes.
But the actual quality of life for people, those little things make a difference.
They do. And the other thing that should be pointed out is that the original variation of drug court before Prop 47 in this county was very successful. In fact, San Bernardino County led the nation in sort of expanding drug court because we had capacity. And I remember I staffed drug court when I was a new DA, and the commissioner that ran it then and some of the other judges that run some of the treatment courts now, they had the ability to leverage people. And I say that word, but there's no other way to say it.
Yeah.
You have to tell somebody, if you don't do A, then B is going to happen, and B is going to be less desirable. And so you want to have A keep happening. Every Friday, we would have 100 to 120 clients in drug court. From the defense standpoint, you'd have the public defender, private attorneys, probation, some Department of Behavioral Health, and those folks, they would graduate.
Yeah.
Right now, the numbers for drug court before Prop 36 passed, we had 16 people in drug court.
Oh, my gosh.
And so you can't blame somebody for not wanting to work a program when they can just be out, and that's a difficult thing. And so we hope to kind of get back restored to that. And the other thing that is important for people to keep in mind when it comes to this idea of Prop 36 is that back in the old days, even with Prop 47, prosecutors, in my opinion, and I did private defense work for 5 years, I saw people exercise great discretion to say, hey, we'll give you a break on this. We'll give you a break on this. My guy wasn't going to prison over drugs. My gal wasn't going to prison over theft.
Yeah.
There's discretion. And so we still exercise that. I think going into the Prop 36 era, it's up to prosecutors to be very moderate about how they devote the resources of Prop 36 to people who are truly addicted. And that goes back to the point I'm making. We don't want Prop 36 to be used for people who are serial thieves that do nothing but prey on people and then come in and say, oh, I got a trap door for no custody. I want a program.
Yeah.
No, that program is for the person that is legitimately addicted and has finally decided, okay, I think I can get better with the help of the system and the boundaries of custody, if that makes any sense.
No, of course. And again, going back to my own experience on patrol, you talk about people using discretion. And sometimes, again, I'll say like maybe people who aren't, they don't understand how deputies work or, we talk to people. Yes, we're responding to crimes and we're taking people into custody, but being able to have that ability to say, hey, is this a problem? Like,
Yes.
Do you feel like you have an addiction? And tell me a little bit about that because I can put it in the report and we can get you help if you seriously need it. And, sometimes my family or people that they don't understand, the job, I'll tell them, I would literally have people, suspects, I guess, or people I'm dropping off, and they would say, thank you, Miss Harper, thank you for listening. Thank you for doing this. And it seems silly and it seems like people wouldn't believe it. But, when I truly believe, our deputies and our probation officers, they're out there, they're doing things for the right reasons. Yeah. And there's not some massive conspiracy to just put people in prison.
Right.
It's really to create a better quality of life for all of the residents so that you don't have drug addicted people, breaking into empty homes, stealing air conditioning, breaking apart fire hydrants that cost businesses and homeowners thousands and thousands of dollars so they can go scrap metal to get them $20 so they can get high,
The hope too with Prop 36 is, and I've been in the community talking to small business owners because they're the ones that are hit the most.
Yeah.
And to let you know, the big retailers really kicked in on Prop 36 for us. Target, Home Depot, they were great. And, they deal with it too. If they're going to get that involved, particularly in a politically charged climate like California, where they know that, there could be some retribution and they're saying, hey, that's enough. It's the small business owners that now with Prop 36, we want to encourage them through the sheriff's department or a police department to call now, because now there's things that can be done. I mean, we have a great relationship with Stater Brothers, and they were very big on Prop 36. And we would talk to them and say, listen, guys, you need to make sure you call and make those reports, because now with the potential recidivism factor under Prop 36, we can keep track of those things. People can't now go serial petty theft in 4 of your different stores in the county, we can aggregate those now. So Prop 36 helps a lot.
Yeah.
So we hope that that brings back some confidence within the business community that at least in our county, they can do business and expect their margins to be better and their shoppers are going to be safer.
I'm glad you brought up the retail component because Prop 36, this variation of Prop 36 was not the first time, not the first attempt to fix Prop 47.
Right.
But I just don't think that the retailers were there yet.
Right.
Maybe they hadn't felt the pain as much or thought it would get better. But yeah, this was really big, on the law enforcement side because we're in Sacramento and we sit at the tables and talk about different legislation and how we can help. When Prop 36 came around, they asked for money and we give it, to things. This is our members' money, so we used it judiciously.
Yes.
So this time when it came around, we really said, hey, we gave last time and it didn't work.
Right.
We need the retailers to be on because we need the coffers, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's sad to say, but you have to have the money
and that
to pass a ballot
and
initiative.
that strategy worked well. It worked very well. And I think what really helped was the way in which the initiative was written was very straightforward and it made sense to people. And it wasn't a sales job. And what we tried to provide all the time on anybody who was interested, particularly people who wanted to donate, were the numbers. We weren't just calling it something and not having anything behind it.
Yeah.
But when you have the data, then you realize what's happened. And I think it also helped a little bit that there was this flurry of legislative activity that sort of fell flat. And I appreciate the attempts, but I will say this about if you're trying to fix nuances that clearly become evident after a 10-year experiment of Prop 47, call the DA's office.
Yeah.
Call law enforcement. Don't exclude us.
Yeah.
Because what happens is that you believe that what you're doing is you're trying to put this show together that, you're really going to be tough on crime for about 3 weeks. But even those Band-Aids weren't going to work, and they knew they weren't going to work.
Right.
If you had included us in the last 2 years, perhaps something else could have been worked out that wouldn't have been, in their opinion, as onerous as Prop 36, which, by the way, it isn't.
It's not.
If you give somebody choice and autonomy, and we can talk about this later in the podcast, if you talk about that component of anything within the criminal justice system, if you give an individual the ability to operate that and you encourage them to do it in a certain way, then I think in the end it's going to work out better than having legislative fixes that really, from a law enforcement standpoint and a prosecutorial standpoint, you're not ever going to be able to work those. They were talking about, you can prosecute aggregate crimes over county lines. So explain to me, I'd like to ask a legislator, explain to me how I'm going in real time, going to coordinate with Orange County and LA. And at the time, there was no coordination with LA back in the day.
Right.
LA, Orange County, San Bernardino, Ventura, how are you going to get all those cases together? Who's going to be the prosecuting agency? But the idea at the lectern in Sacramento was, no, we're taking care of all this. We're giving the prosecutors all the tools that we need. We've been talking to you for 2 years about the tools that we really need, but we faced just a resistant idea of, no, it's just going to be mass incarceration. And it goes back to what you're talking about. The irony in what I found in law enforcement, and particularly as the DA in the county, but having been a prosecutor and in private practice as a defense attorney, I've never met anybody who roots for more crime tomorrow.
Right.
That makes our communities less safe. Cops don't do it, sheriffs don't do it, DAs don't do it, and defense attorney. Everybody agrees that we hope tomorrow there's fewer and fewer issues of crime.
You were saying something about the autonomy and giving people choice, and I think that kind of, to me, that harkens to kind of our core belief at SEBA is just like accountability. But I think it also, sometimes it can be taken as, we just want everybody to be held accountable. But I think when people hold themselves accountable and then do something to actually change it, I think the changes stick better.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Rather than somebody just writing something up that they think is going to fix their problems.
Yes.
I think we all know, even personally or whatever, when you invest in something, when you have a stake in it, when you make the decision, when you own it, the outcome is going to be better. It
is. And I think that one of the things that gets lost often in the discussion, particularly the political discussion that often is had with the criminal justice system in California, is that you still have to look at it in the lens and the context of the separation of powers.
Yeah.
So I point out to young people in high schools all the time when we teach our civil liberties class, I didn't write the vehicle code in California. It is thick.
Yes.
If you've ever seen it, and you in law enforcement know. Now that's the legislature regulating everything. And so I'll talk to young people about the fact that if you have a air freshener hanging from your rearview mirror, that's a vehicle code violation, and law enforcement now has reasonable suspicion to pull you over. So number one, understand what the law is. And just because you don't know it doesn't mean it doesn't apply. Number
Right.
two, the legislature could change that if they wanted to.
Right.
And they don't.
Right.
So
Yes.
it's a basis for law enforcement to contact somebody. Now, if law enforcement pulls somebody over and it's a young kid or it's a person that they know through experience, you're going to get a warning ticket on that. But that should not turn into a huge debate over law enforcement is pulling people over for the wrong reasons. That's the legislator's job,
Right.
is to change the law if they don't like it. It's up to the executive, which is law enforcement, and my office to enforce the law and then exercise some discretion like what you're talking about, the street level, or what we would do, at the official level of filing or not filing a case. People don't understand there's many cases we can prove beyond a reasonable doubt, and we turn them down.
This is not a knock on, the office of the district attorney, and I was never, on patrol or a detective when you were DA. So I'm not trying to point fingers, but I mean, what you're saying is true, so much so that we would get frustrated, right?
Yeah.
Like, I wrote this report,
Yep.
and I laid all these facts out, and then they just offered him this or they
Yep.
just offered him that,
Yep.
right? So
Yep.
it was. I think sometimes people don't understand how lenient the system can be or is, you know.
Correct. And it's because of those checks and balances, because you have the scrutiny of a judge and then an advocate for the defendant, and then all of a sudden you have this full context. Now, oftentimes, you're just not going to be able to work cases out. Other times you are going to be able to do that. But this notion that the criminal justice system is somehow just this amazing large bulldozer that just pushes everybody under dirt or whatever, a pile of debris, I've worked in it my whole career. And that free will and autonomy goes back oftentimes to individuals who may find themselves in the system and they're offered a decision and they make a bad decision.
Yeah.
People don't account for that, right? I can go back and talk at times when I represented people and I would broker what I thought were very good deals and people would turn it down, or family members would talk them out of it, and they would go to trial and get 3 times the amount, right?
Yeah.
Now that's the way the system works. I mean, we allow people to represent themselves.
Yeah.
People do it. If you allow people to represent yourself, then you can also choose to take a deal or not take a deal. And sometimes that ends up in a worse result, but oftentimes law enforcement gets blamed for that too. Because the public can't see behind the fact that this person has an attorney, they ultimately get to decide.
Prop 47 preceded Prop 57.
Yes.
And we called it kind of the trifecta, AB 109, Prop 47, then Prop 57, which kind of, we thought, changed the landscape
Yes.
and took a lot of tools away and,
Yes.
pushed inmates, state prison inmates down to the county level. That's a whole nother, we could talk for an hour just on that alone.
Huge push on local resources.
Yes.
Which the general public doesn't understand,
Doesn't
because
understand.
they think it sounds, that's a great deal. And then your legislators at state level go, well, we've emptied the prisons.
Yeah.
Well, technically you have, but it's not a mechanism to change the hearts of men and women. You're just housing them in a different spot.
Right. And then not housing ones that
It's a push.
generally would
Yeah,
have
yeah.
sometimes even been in prison.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things, again, when I talk to friends who aren't in law enforcement or just normal conversations,
Yeah.
community, whatever,
Yeah.
I try to say these changes have made it so people who would have been in prison for these crimes are out.
Yeah.
And, if that's okay with you, then I guess that's how it works. But, going back to the thing where you say, law enforcement, our members, the people we represent, that's where we got frustrated with the past 5, 8, 10 years because, especially being in Sacramento, it was like, you guys make these laws.
Yeah.
All we're doing is enforcing them,
Right.
and somehow we're the ones getting kicked,
Right. I hope that we get out of that pattern. I hope that there's enough discussion. I hope the residual hangover from Prop 36 doesn't become political baggage for anybody.
Yeah.
That law enforcement has to somehow, they're going to be persona non gratis because they were pro Prop 36. We want to help people all the time. You know, if there's ways in which they think within the Prop 36 context that there's legislative things that would do better, then we'll see. I will tell you this, and we've talked about it at the state level with DAs, because I'm on the board for CDAA, and we worked very closely with implementing this. There is no one, and you could interview anybody on this. I'm not outing anybody. There is no one that I've worked with across the state level, and these are the big counties that help make this happen, that don't understand this has to be implemented in a very discerning, moderate way.
Yeah.
We cannot turn this into the old three strikes law,
Yeah.
where all of a sudden in 2 years, critics are going to be able to say, well, okay, great. You had this many cases, this many arrests, and you put all these people in jail and only 3 people did rehabilitation.
Yeah.
We've got to make sure that we prioritize it. And that's on us because we have a bit of a tailwind of a change in the narrative of how we're going to deal with addicted folks. We hope to reduce homelessness, but it really is up to us to administer it. I just hope it doesn't get back into the quagmire of if it's always politics, you never actually focus on people.
Right.
If it's all about politics, it's just about power, and it should be about people. And that's what we want to do at the local level.
Yeah, you see the pendulum, like you brought up 3 strikes. The pendulum swung this way, right? And now, then we went Prop 47, 57, and it swung way to this way.
Yeah.
Hopefully, we are, with the advent of just getting more information, social media helps to inform or sometimes misinform people. But, I think if we keep progressing and saying, okay, we see this side, okay, we saw this, we've seen these 2 failed experiments, I guess. Let's go down the path of the middle and let's get back to some guardrails here that everybody, for the most part, reasonable people can agree on.
I agree. And I think what's unique about San Bernardino County, Lolita, is 2 things. Is number one, the sheriff's department here has been on the cutting edge in terms of its HOPE team and its outreach to homeless people before it became fashionable to do that. And I don't mean to say that it's always good to help homeless people.
Yeah, before it was the top polling issue for politicians,
but
right?
When it really became, in LA and San Francisco, these cities where it was undeniable that it was an issue, and then all of a sudden you had all these talking heads talking about, oh, I'll fix it, I'll fix it, I'll fix it. What was great is that here in our county, there had already been sort of an under the radar approach.
Yeah.
Because I think our moderation in this county is a lot different, right?
Yeah.
Law enforcement, again, goes back to they don't want these people rotting on the streets.
Yeah.
People don't understand the high rate of overdose deaths and assault deaths within the homeless population. You guys were in on it too. We work with everybody else. The DA's office works with everybody else in the county to try to develop those areas where there is moderation. So people want people who are continually committing crimes to get help or go to jail. But I think there's a real reasonable moderation in this county. So I'm hoping that regardless of what may happen at the state level, here in this county, we don't do that seesaw back and forth, because Shannon Dyke has been around long enough to know, and he's a data guy, right? He understands that component. The resources can't handle the swing back and forth, and it's not appropriate, I think, to put our community in this idea that it has to be one or the other. And sometimes you have to hit hard. We still pursue the death penalty in this county. The majority of states in this country don't, and I mean the majority of voters in this state like it, but you'd be hard pressed to find it. But in some areas you have to strike hard. But that doesn't mean in all the areas you're striking hard, and that's what I get tired about with the political discussions that happen.
Yeah, the all or nothing.
It's horrible.
The dichotomy of it all.
I know that the fact that we pursue the death penalty on certain cases and we give these cases more consideration than any other case, that I'll get maligned simply because we still seek the death penalty. Nobody will ask what kind of case, what were the facts and circumstances, what were your considerations, or how many cases did you not pursue special circumstances on that would have? It'll just be, okay. And I hear it. I get comments from people who are like, oh, well, this guy, he's a death penalty guy, so he's just he just wants to put everybody in jail on every other case he can do. And that's not true. And, of course, the homeless outreach stuff that the sheriff's department has done and the other agencies done, I think shows a good moderation in this county.
Yeah.
And we like it that way. That's why we like living here.
The irony of the death penalty thing is there's been 11 or 12, I could be getting my data wrong, and I don't want to be, but it's since 1970s that it's gone to the voting public of California, and every single time they have voted for the death penalty.
Yeah.
Not saying, that people are wrong to not like it or whatever. However, it just seems, you're still following the will of the state voters.
Right.
Not all of them, of course. But,
Right. Yeah.
But in in elections, time and time again, for the last 3-4 decades, the voters have said, we believe in this.
Yeah.
Not for everything, right?
No, gosh, no.
But it's appropriate in certain circumstances.
It is. And it's interesting to me that when we have debates over propositions like Prop 47 and Prop 36 and this whole battling initiative thing where there's a big push to not overdo Prop 47, right? Because everybody says, hey, That's an initiative. That's a law. It takes 2/3 of a vote to overcome an initiative, which, by the way, you're never going to get in this state. So it is the law. So we have those debates, but yet we have another proposition that has sat there and has said, this is also what the people want.
Yes.
But yet there's ways in which it's significantly undermined. And I think voters get frustrated that when they see there's a picking and choosing between a process that we have, which is an initiative process in the state, and if you leave it up to the people, then you have to abide by what the people have voted for. Obviously, 36 is a big indication that people want to change. 66 is another debate altogether, right? And I have very, very close friends and members of my family who do not believe in the death penalty. And I tell them all the time, listen, I think there's reasonable arguments to be made against the death penalty.
Right.
But there's an easy fix in this state. We don't need to have a moratorium. We don't need to have death row shut down. We don't need to have all these philosophical and political debates. And I'd love to engage in those where people talk about disparaging and disproportionate and all that kind of stuff. That is so surfacey, it drives me crazy.
Yeah.
To say that's the argument. But at the end of the day, if it is as bad and as unsavory as you want to make it, and I'm, again, be an advocate for anti-death penalty, with power, politics, and prestige, take on Prop 66.
And don't just do it because it's a personal decision and place a moratorium that backs the entire system 75 years and undoes the will of the voters.
Yeah. But the bottom line is we would have a straight answer to the voters if you just said, okay, we're going to take the proposition back to the people and we're going to put it out and maybe lay out terms that argue that, hey, these are the problems with the death penalty. So the anti-death penalty people get the opportunity to advocate, and then if people are in favor, but we dance around this. We insist on the law in certain areas, and then we discount a law in another area, and that's what bothers me about the process in California.
Well, I know this is a whole nother tangent, but the one last thing on Prop 66, the irony was there was a competing ballot measure that was the opposite, and it did not pass, and this one did. So it's like, again, 11 or 12 times in the past 4 decades, the people have spoken. And then you leave it up to one person.
And it's a very difficult conversation to have, because oftentimes you talk about, well, it's not a deterrent. I don't think that the death penalty is designed to be a deterrent. I don't think that's why it exists. And there's discussions about the cost of the death penalty. I understand that. We always have to be good stewards of resources all over the place. But when you've broken the system to make it needlessly prolonged, that's going to add to the cost. And then to turn around and say it's the cost problem, that's a little bit disingenuous. I mean, I know that might get some traction with the public. My response on that is unfortunately, if you look at how much money is spent on our public school system in California, it dwarfs what we spend on the prison system. And unfortunately, our public school system is probably not as successful as we would like it to be.
Yeah.
And I tell people all the time, at least with a penal system, that I can't guarantee that every child going to school is learning to their capacity, because the school system may not operate as well as it should. But I can guarantee that everybody who's in custody is not going to victimize somebody on the street who's an innocent victim. So for my money, that's a 100% versus we're in the bottom third in the public school system. That usually stops people to think. And I'm not. It's not novel.
Yeah.
But when you're making those comparisons, don't talk to me about the cost of the criminal justice system when the cost of the public school system is so much greater, and we don't have nearly the success that we should in this state with all the resources we have.
There's so many things there.
Sorry,
I think about public school and how much I want it to succeed, and but that's a whole.
And I know a lot of teachers that devoted their entire careers to public school, and they get frustrated.
Yes,
they get frustrated at the bureaucracy, and I think the public school system is phenomenal. I'm not advocating to get rid of it, but if we're going to talk a cost game as it relates to public safety and a cost game as it relates to public education, we should talk about those two things together.
Yeah.
You can't take one argument and say, well, we need to discount this because it costs too much, when I might be able to say, well, wait a second, if you apply the same logic, then this thing is wholly unsuccessful. So anyway.
People love to make that correlation, like this money spent here and, based on a lot of things, right? And I whether people agree with me or not, I love that people want to be informed and have opinions and that kind of stuff. But I've talked to you enough to know that you do too. It's not about like changing minds. It's just about informing people on what the real
Yeah.
issues are on this side.
Let's stop polarizing the issue when there's reasonable discussion to be had on both sides. Just like Prop 36, if our legislators had listened to law enforcement and district attorneys,
Yeah.
we wouldn't have had to go through the Prop 36, which many people think was an overreach. I don't think it is.
Yeah.
But we went year after year to try to get legislation or to stop legislation, and we would go to Sacramento. They wouldn't even meet with us.
Oh,
I mean,
I know.
I've been with you. Like,
Yes.
I've never experienced. Sometimes I'm like, I'm nobody special, but when you go up to Sacramento in your role as a district attorney's office is considered a large county, and we're growing
Yes.
at the rate that no other county is growing, and you can't even get a meeting, right? It went from my first year as DA, everybody wanted a picture with me, John McMahon. I mean, I felt like I was on the red carpet. The last 2 years, the doors are shut. No, you're meeting with a staff member. And, I'm no genius, but I understand that the message that sends
Yeah.
is they can't be looked at as being pro-law enforcement. All we wanted to do is say, if we can make these fixes here, maybe this whole Prop 36 push won't be necessary. But we couldn't get the inroads. We were too busy battling whether they were going to allow LWOP and death penalty inmates to petition the court for a resentence.
Yeah.
We beat that back. But that when you're dealing with issues of addiction and homelessness,
Yeah.
I think that's more important than considering somebody who qualified for special circumstances on a murder case to go after 35 years. Let's give them a shot at seeing if a judge will resentence them. I just don't think that's a priority.
I hear you. And again, yeah, Sacramento is a very special place. I hate that it, like you said, I guess I can say I hate that it took so long or that they didn't listen. It was such a frustrating time. And who knows, it could be frustrating again when we're back up there. But the fact that the voters made this very clear, I think that is a really good sign. And I think I've started to see, well, we've seen that now people that we never thought were in, proponents of law enforcement or would stand up for law enforcement are now very much talking about public safety and peace officers. And so
That's good.
hopefully, again, though, it's so much politics, like you said. I don't want it to just be political because this is what the polls show is important to people.
Right.
Just, for the I know you're elected and that's why we respect you so much. Just be who you are.
Yeah.
Stand on your values. Just stand on your values.
Yeah.
Stop trying to do what you think is popular or what you think people are going to like, because I think a lot of these politicians are very out of touch. And I think a lot of the voters don't have time to be up on every single thing that they vote on. So they just don't know. They vote on name recognition or whatever.
Yeah, I think it's important to try to find that common ground. And I think you would much rather have respect for somebody you disagree with, but that they're going to live out their values and they're going to do what they say they're going to do.
Yeah.
That you can respect.
Yeah.
Right. And it works out good. I hope that there's a significant change in Sacramento with a lot of people being turned out and a lot of changes. What I'm hoping is this new era is that we get back to more of the old school politics of, hey, let's agree to disagree on this issue, but maybe we can come up on another issue. I tell legislators all the time, and I've gotten to know more of them. I've been around longer. That are not happy that I was a big Prop 36 proponent. But I tell them, I'm saying, I understand why you're not. But if you have something that you think we could help you with that has to do with housing or has to do with mental health, where you would normally think that a proponent would be from law enforcement, the DA's office, ask us. Just don't forget to ask us. I'll help you with the bill, right? That doesn't mean I expect you to always, do whatever I ask, but there's got to be a conversation that happens more consistently rather than have these battles over what we've seen. So hoping in the new Prop 36 era, that particularly with over 70% of the voters in California agreeing to it, that the reality is we need to stay common sense and moderate, and we need to use this tone talking about everything else.
Both of those points make me think of trust, right? So for the legislators to trust law enforcement, okay, what is your input on this? Could you possibly give a different perspective? It comes down to trust, right? And now with Prop 36, like you're saying, law enforcement and the district attorney's offices, they need to use it properly, judiciously, right? And and that is also going to speak a lot to the trust. What do we do with this tool that we're grateful to have? Let's make sure that we use it properly and in the way it was intended to. So I know I think when we were talking about it, just when I was trying to schedule you, you even said something like, there's so many deputies, that we have now, or even probation, that don't even understand what it was like before, right? Like,
yeah, that's
like,
a good point.
Yeah, like what is the new?
So I came up in there in 1998. That was old three strikes law. Proposition 22 had just passed, making 422 a strike. A lot of juvenile crimes, you could direct file those, and we've gotten away from that, and I think some of that's good.
I agree.
I think
agree.
some of that is you don't direct file
Yeah.
on juvies, on even if they're serious cases. You at least have a process to evaluate what their danger is going to be going forward. But yeah, so when we came up, everybody knew Penal Code 666,
Yep.
petty theft with a prior.
Yep.
Right? At the time, 11377s could be a felony or a misdemeanor.
And that's possession of a controlled substance.
Discretion was used if somebody had a number of 11377s, or you filed as a felony, but then that felony resulted in drug court. It resulted in so then we got
those are the arrests where we would say, hey, is this a problem? Are you addicted? And then they'd open up the trust. Yeah.
Now young law enforcement who've been around for 5 years have no idea what this 666.1 with Prop 36 and all this, like what's recidivism mean? What do you mean with recidivism theft? And how does these prior convictions qualify? How do you do it? It's almost like when the new gang laws came in and there was the STEP Act, everybody didn't know, okay, how do we go into court and actually lay a foundation for the fact that this person's a gang member, or the 186.22 enhancement? These young people are like, how do we figure out, if we're looking at their criminal history, if we can arrest them for a Prop 36 theft, or is it still going to be the petty theft? So it's very interesting to see. And so we've tried to do some internal educating with agencies by giving them our guidelines post Prop 36. So we've helped that, but we're going to put some trainings on coming up in the fall, because it's all been so new that we've had to figure out internally in our office, what are our standards and policies going to be as it relates to looking at this, going back to that point I was talking about earlier with the resource.
Yeah.
Just because somebody could qualify with a recidivist theft under Prop 36 or the drug doesn't mean we file it. Doesn't mean we don't, agencies, if you have probable cause and you want to arrest that person, but we need to make sure that agencies realize, okay, this one I'm arresting for, and now I know through experience since December, the DA's office isn't going to file this as a felony. That'll help you guys. But I'll be honest and admit to you, it's so new that we're in the process of just trying to train the agencies, including the Sheriff's Department, as to sort of what our policy is going to be on that.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see it play out.
It will be. But these young people are like, what's this? You mean you can aggregate thefts now? You can do, and all the folks that were back around in the day, you guys are all now in admin, most of you, so you're training all these people. It's exactly the way it works. So it's very interesting to see sort of how it comes back around.
So if it works, and of course nothing works perfectly, but if it works the way it's intended, what are the outcomes that we hope to see in another decade? The majority of people that are in the criminal justice system, because they're addicted to narcotics, right? Everything they do is motivated by that addiction. That we're able to leverage those individuals into facilities that we think we have the capacity for. And I don't mean necessarily a lockdown program, but it's going to be something that's going to have some scrutiny. Yeah.
Right. Have some accountability, have some responsibility on both ends.
Some enforcement.
And what you do is you take the people, let's say that you take 100 people out of that group, and that you hope that you hit, I mean, let's be honest, if you hit 70 or 80%, that would be incredible.
Phenomenal.
But if you hit 60%, that's 60% more people than you were helping by them just continuing to get site release. No. So the hope is in 2 years, we start to see the metrics in terms of the number of cases that are dismissed as a result of successful rehabilitation, and then a reduction in the number of homeless people. Because
people keep talking about homeless as though it's like a housing issue.
Yeah.
And again, that's another tangent, but
not from where we see it, Lolita.
Yeah.
You know that. There may be a segment of that where that, and that,
small
I think that's an issue for other people that have greater expertise than I have in housing. Probably the Sheriff's Department has. But we know from work, that those individuals that are homeless, you look at those criminal history sheets, and it's drugs, theft, and then it increases. It's a greater degree of theft, and it's more drugs. And that's the ones that we hope that we can help to reduce that number of people that are addicted, and ultimately stop the flow of the homeless on the streets. Because up till now, that chronic use of narcotics without any rehabilitation has literally fried the brain. Every doctor will tell you it changes your, whatever it is up there, it changes it. And then you can't function normally.
Yeah, that's another conversation that I enter into. Just not that I always talk about work with people, but these things come up and they're interesting and people like to have discussions, educated discussions. And I love that people in my personal life ask me certain things, especially when they disagree with me. I love to be able to have respectful conversations. But one of those is, the mental health component. Is law enforcement qualified to deal with mental health calls? Well, some of these things are drug-induced, mental health problems and the violence that comes with that and the psychosis that comes with it. But yes, stopping the drug addiction, I think, will help mental illness because we know it fries the brain.
It does.
Like the old commercial that was on when I was a kid with the egg in the frying pan.
That's it. And and it's interesting thinking about, addiction is somewhat an analogous to going back to autonomy and free will, right? There's a certain point at which the chemical imbalance is going to overtake your ability to operate your autonomy in ways that are going to be beneficial to you consistently. We all have our hangups. I talk to people about this very openly. I have certain vices. Everybody has certain vices, but I have a discipline and a support group around me where I can manage those vices to where the priorities stay the priorities. After a certain point, there's so many people that desperately want to make the right things the priorities, but they can't do it because of what the drugs have done, right?
Yeah.
And that's where we have to intervene with individuals rather than talking about this idea that somehow incarceration is always bad, right?
Yeah.
And oftentimes the template that's used by people that are anti-incarceration as it relates to people who are on drugs, the idea is that you wouldn't apply that same template to your own family. You love your family enough to go, if my kids continue to operate a certain way, then there's going to be consequences.
Right.
And I hate to reduce it to that way, right? But there is a certain time where we as society have to be better stewards of our society to go, okay, these people, we need to force them into help because they're never going to be able to choose that. And that's what I love about the potential of Prop 36. That's what I love about Laura's Law. That's what I love about the CARE Act that's now, it's starting to get into that sort of fill in those niches where it didn't have to be one or the other. I think we're coming together a little bit to try to find some of those options for capacity that are very, very important.
You had mentioned earlier how San Bernardino County is, I wouldn't say it's an anomaly, but I love the way we work here. So a quick story, because it just made me think when you were talking, when I first became a deputy, and I grew up in Orange County, and one of my best friend's dads was an attorney, and we all knew he smoked weed way before it was legal. He just, he surfed, he smoked weed. And
California dreaming right
there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So every Halloween they throw a big party. So I went back down, this was like 2006 or 7. I was a brand new baby deputy. And he, we were hanging out and he kind of comes over, sees how I'm doing because I had moved away, San Bernardino County. And he looks at me and he goes, how can you live with yourself arresting people for doing drugs?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up with this man, like
that's pretty harsh.
And you know what? And I looked and I said, you know what? It doesn't bother me. I said, because Jack, I think you see what happens down here in Orange County where people have resources, they can put their kids in rehab. I'm telling you what I've seen out in unincorporated Fontana at the truck stops and girls selling themselves because of this addiction. And of course the old Prop 36 was in play back then. I said, I have no problem.
Right.
It doesn't bother me at all because the consequences when the resources aren't as great or when socioeconomics are lower is really sad.
Yes.
And I think a lot of these, I shouldn't say, but my suspicion is that a lot of the people that make the decisions, like the Berkeleys or the whoever, like they're not looking at it from actually being out there and seeing what's really out there and how miserable it is for these addicted people.
Yes.
And that's one thing the sheriff has said too, which I very much respect. He says we're not helping people, allowing them to just be out here rotting.
That's the thing. That's the thing that I get so frustrated at. And I'm a big proponent of civil liberties. I mean, we teach a class and we go into schools and tell kids, hey, if law enforcement has contact with you, limit how far that's going to go as much as you can. Don't battle them on the street. If they ask to search your car and you say no and they do it, they have to have a very good reason. But the civil liberties part of that is I understand that we always want to guard people's autonomy.
Yeah.
But when they become a danger to themselves and others because they cannot make a rational decision,
Yeah.
I think it's wrong for us to stand on the sideline and go, the trade-off is you got to let them be, because somehow if we take care of this portion of society, we're going to somehow impact you and me, who can actually exercise our autonomy
Yes.
generally pretty well,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That somehow we're going to creep over into you and I enjoying our civil liberties. And I'm like, no, there's a consideration. You've got to finally say there may be a group of folks where you have to intervene.
Yeah.
That's why I love the CARE Act when that was, and Laura's Law and all that kind of stuff, because what it does is it takes away the bureaucracy of it having to be a family member, and it can be anybody. It can even be law enforcement who recognizes this person is in a situation where they cannot make a rational decision to eat, to drink water, to sleep. And it's better for us as a society to say, we're not going to intervene because we're trying to live to some high ideal of civil liberties. No, we can do both. And I think that's your point, is that we've got to get to the point. And I tell you, the public, if you ask them, even driving through the streets of San Bernardino, would you rather have a government agency trying to help these people, or do you just think it's better to leave them alone? The general public is going to say, we need to help these folks.
Well, and
that's where they want their tax dollars to go.
I'll go one step further, not even just the general public. I can't tell you how many families have been so frustrated. Like, I call the police, my daughter, my son, they won't do anything. And then, again, I'm like, it's not that they won't, it's that they can't. Right? Like, it's, and people don't understand. They're like, the police are supposed to help, and this is happening in my home, and they're destroying things. So hopefully we're getting back to Prop 36, back to common sense, and back to...
I think people need to understand, too, law enforcement, even though its expertise has grown, the idea of law enforcement in our separation of powers is on a much more limited basis than people want.
Yeah.
You guys are the easy people to blame because you're the most visible. You have the most hands-on contact with people. And I mean hands-on, I mean literally hands-on.
Literally hands-on,
right?
yes.
But you're the first touch, right?
Yeah.
And you're trained to do a certain thing, which is know the law, understand the elements, right?
Yeah.
Try to keep people safe, and throughout that mission, arrest people who you believe, through probable cause. That's a very limited role.
Yeah.
It's up to other disciplines within society, particularly in California,
yes,
where we have the ideas of Department of Behavioral Health. We have child family services. We have probation, right?
Yes.
We have a public school system that does a lot of things for kids. You can't at one point in this continuum of community go, okay, the criminal justice system now should be the fix for everything. Like we talked about earlier at the top of the podcast, we want to help.
Yes.
But there's a limit to how much you can help because we're not trained to do that. We can help facilitate certain things, but to lay all the blame, you have to scrutinize these other areas. And that's what you're saying is it's very, very frustrating. It's only because it's easy to convince the public because you're oftentimes the most visible touch.
Yes.
And you're the last touch that you should be the best touch. And I don't mean best by, it's going to get rough out there sometimes, but you're not a cure-all. Well, nobody is.
Yeah, 2020, after, George Floyd's death, it brought about really good, I think, conversations. It brought about a lot of blame, which I don't want to say it wasn't. Overall, I think we all learned a lot. And I think the scrutiny
was appropriate.
Yes.
And it took time for people to unpackage the scrutiny.
Yes.
And I think that was great for law enforcement, for our office, for community, for society. And I think that appropriate scrutiny was a great thing.
Yes, I agree. And I think we made a lot of good changes where law enforcement was allowed to be at the table. We were able to say, hey, yeah, we can help in this area. You want to make this better? We can help. Where I would continually tell either legislators or community advocates or, again, family members, you are looking at, and you're talking about systemic problems, right? And we are just the tip of the spear. We're the ones that get called when that system has failed, whether it be the healthcare system with mental health or whether it be, other systems. We got to go to the root of the problem. Yeah. You can't just look and say, you're not handling this well.
Yeah.
It's like, we used to say it on patrol all the time, like, you're calling me to fix a problem in 15 minutes that's been growing for 15 years. And that's just not
And,
in certain ways we can do a lot of things within, like you said, within our control or within our authority, but you can't fix 15 years of drug addiction or 15 years of whatever else has been happening.
and it's very difficult along all of those lines to go back and to be able to point out where the individual has been failed by something. And nobody ever wants to scrutinize someone else. I don't want to personally criticize anybody. It's
Right.
uncomfortable. But when you look back and you talk about the history of what leads up to that point, even if, and this is to me, it's a neat concept, although no one's ever going to be able to actually implement it, is the mental health professional that might arrive at a 911 call instead of law enforcement. We've heard this popular.
Yes.
There's not a lethal force encounter that I haven't observed in the last 2 years where, number one, a mental health person would have even gotten out of the car to help anybody because the situation was so tense. There was the potential there for not only people who had already been injured, but for injury to the additional people involved in law enforcement.
Yeah.
There's just no way to deploy that, right?
Yeah.
But the problem is that you go back, and oftentimes, unfortunately, their family has let them down, and then the school has let them down.
Yeah.
In small ways.
Yeah.
And all along, everybody's kind of thought it's the self-fulfilling prophecy. Well, it'll get better. It'll get better. But then what I've seen, even through private practice, when I represented individuals, is that the problem gets so bad that those people wear out their own family. Their own family can't.
Yes.
They can no longer deal with it because they have other things that they have to prioritize, other loved ones, other kids.
Yeah.
And that person eventually they're out, and then they're out on the street. Law enforcement's not going to fix that in 10 minutes with a contact. And I got news for you. The criminal justice system is not designed from a constitutional standpoint to deal with that issue. If you bring me a young person who's 18 or 19 years old and they're committing thefts because they can't get a job, because they can't read, and they should have been taught to read,
Yeah.
I can't help that. I understand why that young man's frustrated.
Yeah.
He wants the new iPhone, but he can't read a job application because he kept getting passed up from 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade.
Yeah.
And everybody knew he couldn't read, but they were like, it's okay.
Well, they don't hold anybody back anymore.
Well, then reality sets in, and the kid's like, well, what am I going to do for the new phone? I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go into Stater Brothers and steal $949 worth of groceries.
Yeah.
So I know that's a little bit canned and simplified, but if I hadn't done this for 25 years, I don't think I'd be in a position to be able to say that. We need to get back to what you said and quit focusing on the fact that it's somehow when we encounter people in the criminal justice system, that all of a sudden there's going to be this magic fix. It's just not. It's not real. It's not realistic. And what we're not doing is we're not recognizing and going back and how together can we fix those faults that are systemic
Right.
before that young person gets up to the point where they get past the point of no return.
You just saying you've been doing this for 25 years, and
Actually, longer than that now that I think about it. I'm older than I remember.
well, I kept thinking about the 70s, and I'm like thinking, 2 decades ago. I'm like, oh God, no, the 70s were like four decades ago.
Absolutely.
Or maybe more. Yeah. Anyways, it's to think that, so more than 25 years, but your experience is vast. And what I think is so interesting about you is that you have been, and you mentioned it earlier, on both sides,
Yeah.
on the defense and on the prosecution.
Yeah.
How do you think that helps you in your role?
I think that I never lose the human aspect of who are dealing in the criminal justice system. Nobody's ever a number to me. It's always a person. It's always somebody that you evaluate. Why did they get here, and how do we deal with this system now? I tell people all the time, one of the most daunting things I've probably done in my career is I used to go visit my clients at 7 a.m. at West Valley on Sunday. Attorneys can always get in, and there was no one there, and I could get access, and I could spend a couple hours with my client. It was quiet. Everybody's head was fresh. I knew they'd been up anyway. But when you realize that you walk back, and I tried 5 murder cases when I was a defense attorney, and the clients that I would visit the most were those most serious cases.
Yeah.
And you realize you're sitting there with somebody who's literally the rest of their life in terms of their freedom might be in your hands.
Yeah.
And you talk to that person and you realize you can make a connection with somebody who's likely not really had a good shot at trust, at people they can count on,
At
right? For a lot of
resources.
different
Yeah,
reasons,
yeah.
right? And so that human aspect is something that you never forget, because even though you have to deal sometimes with people that have done some undesirable things, you still realize there's a person at the other end of that That's carried over to the DA, not only with my colleagues, particularly when you're dealing with issues inside the office that people have difficulties outside with family, loved ones, or all of us are going to go through hard times, right?
Yeah.
So you want to realize that the same clients that I represented, they have hard times too. People that work in the DA's office have hard times too. So we want to approach that from a human standpoint and not forget that, and to give consideration, because in the DA's office we make some very critical decisions about people's liberty. That's what our job is.
Yeah.
And if you just look at those sort of cold from an aspect of, well, how serious was the crime? That's important,
Yeah.
right? Or how many victims were there, right? What's their rap sheet? You want to go beyond that and try to figure out really what is motivating this person and what is their risk for future danger.
Yeah.
Because that's the component that we really play a part in.
That's the part we're supposed to is
it's not just
mitigate
dealing,
and
it's not just
danger.
dealing in the time.
Yes.
If you deal in the time with somebody and you think they can be rehabilitated, then again, it goes back to that component. If they never come back to the system, that's a success story for everybody. But if we consider the human part of everybody and figure out, I think that's a better component. That's what's helped me in terms of private practice. And honestly, Lolita, when you're out making your bones on your own and you got to drum up clients and all that stuff, right? It's about efficiency. It's about resource and efficiency. And I'm a big stickler in our office for how much does that cost? Why are we, what are we paying for? Is this the best use of our resources? Because at the end of the day, that's taxpayer money.
Yeah.
Right? Everything we do is taxpayer money. And so, I'm very conscious about why does this seem to be taking longer than it should when the taxpayers are paying for a system that let's try to make it as efficient as possible.
Yeah, I was thinking about it, and getting ready for this podcast, and also just being here at SEBA because we, as a union, we get a lot of criticism. Even people who are pro law enforcement then will criticize the union saying that we represent bad cops or whatever. It's the due process part that is integral to the system, right? And it's been an eye opener because, having been a deputy and then a detective, sometimes you can get myopic, not saying ignorant, but just kind of looking at it and thinking, oh, these people are always just trying to get people off or whatever. But there's a process, and that process is important. And now being at SEBA, that is what we say. We are here to ensure that our members get proper due process. Right. And that is their right to a defense, but it's also any other person's right who's been accused of a crime, or sometimes in our cases, admin things. It's ensuring due process.
It's very important that people realize that you have to have a process in which you can have very zealous, diametrically opposed advocacy.
Yeah.
That's how the truth comes out. And that's all these human components and all the processes and all the facts and all the circumstances are only going to air if you have a truly adversarial setting. And if it's in an HR setting, then that's important. If it's in a rights setting, if it's in a POR Act setting, all of these things are expectations that your members have and everybody in every other job has, right?
Yeah.
I would talk to people about, teachers. And I mean, I represented some teachers when I was in private practice. People say, well, how come that law enforcement officer can still have their job? Well, how come teachers can still have their jobs when they're having sex with another student, or they're drunk, or their students aren't learning anything? I said there's a process.
Yeah.
And it's up to a neutral party to make that determination. So when I was in private practice, people would be like, well, you were a prosecutor. How could you represent somebody who's charged with murder? My job is, number one, is to make sure that process applies to them the same way it would anybody else.
Right.
If I'm appointed on a case, they should get the same process as if they paid for me on a case, right? They should get the same process, whether they're a gang member from Rialto or whether they're a rich business guy from Rancho. That process should be the same.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was about ensuring there's an integrity in a process that if it's zealously advocated for, then the right result is likely going to be reached by a neutral third party. Right? And that's what drives me nuts about our society today. Everybody wants the inside game. Yeah. Everybody wants to say, well, I like this person because I agree with him. Well, let's scrutinize it, right? Let's and so that due process portion is unbelievably important. And so you make a great point that oftentimes it has to be applied to people who have devoted their career to something that then enables a process to have reviewed if for some reason a right could be taken away,
Yeah.
right? God forbid it's their whole job, right?
Yeah.
But you got to look at that. But on the other side of that process, if you apply that same process to everybody, and let's say that somebody in law enforcement goes through that process and they can't keep their job, well, then that's the right decision.
Yes. It's gone through the system.
Nobody
the
wants to work.
is...
Nobody wants to work for that person, right? And so it's very important. And when we teach kids about their civil liberties, we teach them about the system that we've constructed is designed so that it's not subjective. It's subjective from the two sides coming together, but that process and that due process particularly creates an objectivity that is scrutinized by someone that isn't involved in the parties. It's a judge, or most oftentimes in ours, it's a jury.
Yeah.
And in your guys, it's a labor person, right? It's an arbiter. It's a mediator.
Yeah.
That all is very, very important. That's what's wonderful about the system. It's also what drives me crazy about people talking about the disparate impact that the system often, they say, has, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not denying that there are areas in which there's disparate impact. I don't always want to be very clear. But I'll give you a quick example, Lolita, in terms of due process and how due process can be applied, but people can interpret it to make it look different. At one point, I represented 3 different people on 3 separate murder cases. One guy was a Caucasian, one guy was African-American, and one guy was Mexican.
Okay.
So all 3 of those clients were given offers, determinate term offers. Like they were looking at 25 or 50 to life on murder cases.
Wow.
Okay. And I was glad that I got those offers, right? And I talked to my clients at length about those offers, right? 1 took the offer, 2 did not take the offer. The one person who took the offer was the Caucasian client, and he got 17 years on a murder that he could have gotten 50 to life for.
Yeah.
My other 2 clients' families talked them out of it. They went to trial. Each one of those young men got 50 to life. Now, if you look on paper, somebody's going to say that there was disparate treatment of the system of those individuals. And it still bothers me that I wasn't able to convince those clients that they should have taken the deal. One guy was offered 12 years on 2 homicides.
Wow.
The cases were relatively weak at the early stage, and he didn't take it. So you look back on that and you go, okay, what happened is that the DA at the time was coming from a certain position. I was coming from a subjective position of advocacy. And on all 3 of those individuals, I applied the same approach to get those guys the best deals that they could, right? And people might go, hey, Anderson, why are you working to get deals for people who might have committed murder? No, it's the fact that I would advocate for them as much as I would the person charged with petty theft.
Yeah.
And let's see where it worked out. That process enabled that ultimately I advocated for them as much as I could. The DA did what they could. What was left is that person's choice. And oftentimes that person's choice is not the best choice. And it would lead to people on the outside of the system to say, well, it's a horribly disparate system.
Yeah.
No, again, I go back to we apply the process, and then the outcome is what either is rooted in autonomy by people choosing, or the independent, objective third party, which is most of the time the jury, deciding what's right or wrong, right? And we have cases all the time where juries deadlock or they come back not guilty. I can live with it.
Well, because it went through the process, right?
Because it went through the process.
You said something even just in that, which is, I think that's really important to hear, because stats can be just, they're not superficial, but they're one-dimensional, right? It just shows a number.
That's exactly what they are.
It's very one-dimensional. But you said something where, this case was lacking, and you knew you could get something because it wasn't a strong case, or maybe things weren't done. There was areas to poke holes in. Yeah. And not to bring it back to like SEBA, but for us too. And our sheriff is really supportive, and the sheriff's department's very supportive of SEBA. So this is not to say that of them.
I know exactly where you're going.
But I've heard a lot of chiefs or other people say, we try to get rid of and we can't because the union keeps them. But a lot of that for us too is like, you have to teach your managers how to properly discipline.
Yeah.
If you are violating people's rights and you're not handling the process, like I think we all understand, if you don't read someone Miranda, the whole case can get thrown out, right? Yeah. If you interrogate them without reading them their rights, you lose that case. Yeah. The same applies in labor.
It does.
And unfortunately, I guess in the cases where I think everybody can maybe objectively say maybe they shouldn't have gotten their job back, but if the process isn't followed properly, correct, then that leaves the door open for having someone stay on because their rights were violated.
That's exactly right. And I think that's a great point when you're talking about it in the labor context, and some people get frustrated. But I think what you're talking about is the bedrock that exists in our country. It's what makes our country so unique. We put people on notice about what the expectations are.
Yeah.
So if you're going to be a sheriff's department or a police department, legislatively, you're going to be put on notice. This is how you have to document the progress or the lack of progress of someone, and you know how to do it,
Yes.
right? And if you take the time to do it, then you're going to understand, do you have a shining star in your department, or do you have somebody that there's going to be progressive discipline? But if you're on notice and you don't follow what the process is, it's not right at the end of the stage to fire somebody because they were never given
The proper
the opportunity
Yeah.
to do better. And that's
Yeah.
what we want to do. We always want to preserve and rehabilitate, not only in the criminal justice system, but in the work situation, because there's so much at stake. So the analogies there between those two systems are very, very close. So when you talk about due process, it's really a fine line that particularly law enforcement officers have to walk,
Yeah.
because they deal so much with undesirable conduct and undesirable members of community that aren't very nice to them. But you've got to give them the same process. You can't just arbitrarily search somebody's car.
Right.
You can't just arbitrarily start asking somebody questions that might tend to incriminate them. You know you've got to have X, Y, and Z in place before you do that.
Yep.
That's what's great about our system. That's what makes me so frustrated about when it's criticized. We have more amendments devoted to the criminal justice system in the federal Constitution than to anything else that we deal with in life. Think about it.
Yeah.
Right? The Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, the Sixth Amendment, the Eighth Amendment, and the 14th Amendment.
Yep.
There's no more amendments that are. We have the right to free speech. We love it. There's only one amendment devoted to that. Going back to what you're saying, that due process component is way back. I think our country got it right. Right?
Yeah.
I think our legislators bastardize it sometimes, and they criticize it when it doesn't. What you were talking about, when it doesn't suit the narrative. Narrative never trumps process. It can't. And people will understand process and respect it if they know everybody's getting the same shake. And so that's why it's important to make sure you always respect that. And it goes back to that human aspect that I was talking about before. Each individual needs to have that same protection, because that way we can sleep at night with the results that turn out. And it's the same in the labor market too. You know?
And even in the criminal, when we were getting DAs that, not here, not you, but like, Gascon, people knew, or at least it seemed, he made it very clear he was going to prosecute cops. And you had other DAs in, more liberal places that were wanting to make examples of people. And, I guess every case has to have its due process and see whether it was. But on the certain level, it seemed like they were politically motivated prosecutions, right? And that was when, it really hit, I think, our industry like, oh, having a good defense is extremely important. And you were saying that you get frustrated when people criticize it. I think sometimes I also get frustrated because people will just look at an outcome.
Yes.
They'll look at like what happened on a body camera, and then they'll look at the outcome. There's a reason that the justice system is complex. There's all these factors and evidence and rules and process and then people just want to see this. And this is the outcome, and they want to simplify it.
Exactly.
You can't oversimplify this. You're talking about laws, people's lives. It should never be a simple process.
Right. I don't think I've ever heard anybody articulate it that well in terms of what really is the root of the issue in our system. And people need to respect that. The age of instant gratification, social media, and everything is, by American Idol is not right, right? What may appeal to you initially, that's not going to be the best thing for society. Even when I was still picking juries, I would talk to them about, this isn't a contest between who's better looking, the prosecutor or the defense attorney, or what witness do you like. It's not that.
Yeah.
American Idol, that's fine.
Yeah.
A lot of people have won American Idol and they're crappy singers, but they look great. Let's be honest about it, right?
Yeah.
And vice versa, right? And so you have some people that last long because, society likes it. What you just said, Lolita, is exactly right. The sophistication, the nuances have to be played out. And we can't tinker with this system, right? It's a great system, and you have to. I think the trick for those of us in law enforcement is to articulate it the way you just did to people on the outside that might be critical because they're looking for that outcome. It's not outcome based; it's process based.
Yeah.
That same process can reduce two different outcomes, right? Depending on who's involved, right?
Yeah.
I don't think anybody really thinks that OJ didn't do it, but he got acquitted. But I think there's people that probably aren't fans of OJ that could argue to why there may have been reasonable doubt in that case.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It happens, right? It happens.
I want to get on the community involvement part because you talked about going in, teaching high school kids civil liberties.
Yeah.
I know that community engagement is big for
Yes,
you.
yes.
You've been a huge proponent and just an amazing support for our SEBA charities, and that's
Yes.
not just a pitch. I mean, you can tell when you go and you're shopping and
Yeah.
you and Starla show up. I mean,
Yeah.
you love it.
Yeah.
I just want to talk a little bit about why you think, what drives that for you, that desire.
The frustration of misinformation. That's why we started our community commission. When I came in 2018, in 2019, I put letters out to each of the board of supervisors and says, I want to start a community commission where the supervisors in each 5 of our districts nominate 3 people, and I will meet with them every 3 months and talk about everything criminal justice related, and then I'll allow them to pick the topic. So they serve for 18 months. We're going into our 4th year of that. So I've had that, and what we do is we literally explain, this is what the DA's office does. Every first group, their mouth drops in 2 areas. Number one, they don't realize how many cases we review every year, on average of 65,000. So then they're like, oh my gosh, we had no idea. Now here's where their mouth drops the second time. Only 40 to 45,000 of those cases do we file.
Yeah.
And people, they'll raise their hand and go, wait, you don't file every case that's submitted?
I could tell you no.
No, right.
Yeah.
And it's misinformation, right? So
Yeah.
it's the misinformation. So the community engagement part is about informing the public about what the mission is. It's easy to criticize something if you don't fully understand it. It's much more difficult if you're given a front row seat to understand this is the way the system operates. So that's a big component of what we've done, because if we allow people to literally sit in my building with me for 18 months, then they can be as critical as they want.
Yeah.
I'm just going to explain to you factually how it works, and then I want to get your input. But if I never have the opportunity to engage with that person, then we're never going to be able to get over just what you were talking about before, Lolita, is the outcome based. They don't like it,
Yeah.
so they don't like the DA's office. So that's one component of it. The other is this was really more of a post George Floyd issue. So I would see on YouTube a lot, and I'm not a big social media guy, but at the time my daughter was younger, so then I would be more just making sure whatever she was watching was appropriate, and she
Yeah.
would get me hooked on some of this stuff. And so, law enforcement, it's a traffic violation. It's a kid's flying 55 miles an hour through a school zone because
Yeah.
they want to look cool in front of their buddies when they leave school. Well, a cop pulls them over. They go up to the window, license, registration. F you.
Yeah.
I'm not going to give you my name. You need to call my mom, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not gonna give you my ID. And I'm thinking to myself, in California, I know the law. None of that is legal,
Right.
right? None
Right.
of that is legal. And you would see it over and over again.
And you'd have people advocating, like telling people not to.
Well, and the
cooperate.
YouTube lawyers oftentimes, then what would happen is the conduct would escalate.
Yeah.
So what happens in that situation? Law enforcement knows that's now gone from a traffic violation to a resisting or delaying.
Yes.
So you've gone from an infraction to a misdemeanor. Well, law enforcement has a certain duty, if they have probable cause on a misdemeanor, that then they can arrest that person.
Right.
And they can use reasonable force if they need to. Now, that's obviously going to be a discretionary thing on the street, but then you would see these contacts that should have been quick and painless escalate because the YouTube lawyers are encouraging people to not
resist.
follow the law.
Yeah.
And so I said, you know what? It's ridiculous that in this country we don't teach civics like we used to.
Yeah.
And I said, let's develop a curriculum and put it in the county public schools where we teach kids about their civil liberties as it relates to contacts with law enforcement and contacts with school officials. And so we developed that. The county school board, Ted Alejandre, he took it. They worked on it. Lolita, I thought they were going to go, this is a joke, Anderson. We're not going to do this. Nobody wants this. They literally fell in love with it. So,
They do such a good job.
so we allowed them to take it and kind of make it more less lawyer and more educational.
Yeah.
So it turns out it's a 7-week program, and we're now into our 4th iteration of teaching that, where I literally and a couple of my colleagues, we go into the schools and we give them a primer, almost like what you would get at the academy on the 4th Amendment, the 5th Amendment, and then administrative searches on school grounds. So we give these kids a primer, and their mouths drops when they go, oh, I didn't realize that this is what would happen
Wow.
at a traffic stop.
Yeah.
Now I understand why that happens.
Yeah.
One kid one time, and they get involved pretty quickly, said, hey, He goes, I got hassled by the cops last weekend. I'm like, what do you mean you got hassled by the cops? Tell me what you did. And I'll tell you whether you got hassled or not. He said, I was leaving my friend's house. He goes, I had on a dark hoodie and dark jeans, and I'm walking down the sidewalk. And before I know it, these two cops are, they turn the lights on and they pull me over and they have me sit down and they're asking me my name and ID. He goes, they just did it because of the way I look, because I had a hoodie on. And I said, what time of night was it?
Yeah.
He goes, it was like 1 a.m. I said, how old are you? This kid's in high school. And I said, you look that age, don't you? And I said, there's a curfew in your city. I said, so the cops had a reason to make contact with you. And when they do that, the law in this country says the cops have a constitutional right to know who they're dealing with. That's why they can ask for ID and you can't refuse.
Right.
So then the kids are like, what we found is they're like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense, right? And then we give them examples of, what if your grandmother was a victim of a crime, right? What if your grandmother walked out on the street of New York City where there's thousands of people all the time, diverse, and the description is that the assailant went up to your grandmother, put a knife at her neck, and said, "If you don't give me your purse, I'm gonna kill you." Right?
Yeah.
And the description is, use me as an example, right? Middle-aged white guy wearing a dark suit and a red tie. Well, I guarantee at 5:30 in New York, there's a lot of middle-aged white guys leaving the office. And I said, would you be bothered if 10 of those people were stopped for 3 minutes to see if they had a weapon on them, right? Or they had your grandmother's purse?
Yeah.
Well, no. But what if they finally got to the right guy, right?
Right.
Do you think they had no reason to contact those people at all? And the student will go, well, no, they had sure they had a reason. It's no different, right? Yeah. Descriptions go out. Law enforcement has the obligation to contact people. They do their best to eliminate people, and they got to move on. It's not because they're hassling people.
Yeah.
It's because we have to have this balance in the law. Young people don't understand the balance. It's all take and no give. So we're trying to teach them balance in a constitutional setting as to why it is the cops really want their neighborhood to be safe, but there are times in which law enforcement has to intervene. And then what are the limits of that intervention, if that makes any sense?
Yeah.
So at the end of the 7 weeks, these kids, they love it. They understand exactly why law enforcement is doing what they're doing. And a lot of times it's conversations about watch who you're hanging out with.
Yeah.
Right? Because you may not even know what your buddy's up to, but if he fits the description of somebody who just boosted a 12-pack out of the AM/PM and you're in the car, I'm sorry, cops are going to pull you out of the car and they have every right to do it. So we teach them about that, but don't get mouthy with the cops. But also, and I'll be honest with you, Lita, we tell the students, don't consent to have yourself searched, or don't consent to have the car searched, or don't make an incriminating statement. You don't have to do those things. Law enforcement is very experienced and skilled.
Yeah.
If they have a reason, they may pat you down, but don't take it out on the street. And we actually have the public defender come in the last week of the class, and he goes, hey, let us sort it out in court.
Yes.
Don't sort it out on the street, because that just leads to potential for danger for everybody. So that's a long answer. I'm sorry, but
I love
that's
it.
the community engagement that we do. We do not tout that. No one knows other than the school district that we do this. And I only say this because there's a certain amount of pride that we take that we don't really think there's anybody else in the country where the elected DA goes into schools and literally teaches kids about their constitutional rights. And the teachers love it. Right. And we're hoping to spur these kids into professions that they never thought they would do. But it's really a cool thing. The reason we do that is that to maintain integrity in what we do every day, when we have to strike hard blows, what I'm trying to do at the entry level is to not have these kids in the court system at all. And I tell them the only way you're going to enjoy the court system is if you're getting paid to be there.
Yeah.
That's
a great statement.
Think about it, right?
Yes.
Everybody else,
nobody else wants to be in the system.
If you're not being paid to be in the courthouse, it is a miserable day for you.
Yes.
So I want these kids to understand there's two paths to the courtroom. There's the compelled path, that if you don't understand the balance that law enforcement is striking, then the likelihood is you're gonna run the one path where you're not getting paid, or you can decide this is a pretty cool area. Going back to what we talked about in terms of the amendments, this is rich with jobs. Why don't I get paid to deal in an area where more amendments apply in this area than it does any other area? So we try to spark that in the kids. The only way to do that is get out in the community and do it. It's the only way to do it.
I love that. Man, if there's anything that we can do to, certainly we're not the DA, but like to help facilitate that or be a part of that, it's great, because when you get people to understand, then they don't look at this as I would never do that. Or those people, they like look and then they hear you
Yeah.
say, like, if you're going to be paid to be there, it's like, oh, and all these great things that come with it. I mean, sorry, my mind's just going a mile a minute because I'm thinking there's probably an impact with you doing this to what we've seen in terms of being able to hire more diverse and people from, I always feel like people that grow up in crime impacted areas understand law enforcement better
Yes.
than others,
Yeah.
right? And we
Yeah.
get a lot of our deputies
Yeah.
from those areas
Yes.
because they see the good that happens
Yeah.
from law enforcement.
Yeah. And I will tell you, Lolita, that's a very nice offer. Our closing session last semester, 2 sheriff's deputies did come
That's
at our
awesome.
request, and so they answer questions. So the kids oftentimes want to say, "Hey, how come you're mean in this situation, then you're nice in this situation?" So the different scenarios, and so that was very, very helpful. That they came and they sort of give their ideas, because the kids are very interested in asking them those questions. So thanks for that offer. We'll utilize them again going forward. We're about halfway through this current semester, so when it comes to the last week, we'll have members of your department come in too. It's very, very helpful.
It's so cool.
Yeah.
I could go on and on. I could literally talk to you all day, but I
Oh,
think
gosh.
in the interest of, well, just because I love picking your brain.
Thanks.
And you're so articulate in your
Thanks.
answers. But in the interest of time, was there anything that I didn't ask or that we didn't discuss that you think is relevant for, the listener or our members?
Public safety in the county is everybody's responsibility. It really, really is. I am always encouraged by the fact that the majority of people want to report crime. They want to be helpful. They want to try to keep their own community safe. I think there's a resurgence of people being good neighbors, wanting to be good neighbors, not being disconnected like we were years ago. I think people want to look out for other people. I get a sense of, the politeness when I'm out, and it's encouraging. Again, I think it speaks to the uniqueness of why our area is growing. Everybody needs to be able to play a part. Particularly our criminal justice system. It's a very, very important impact in our community. It impacts a lot of different things. It's great to be a part of. I think my job at this point is to make sure of thinking down the road 20 years from now is what's it going to look like in a California landscape, and how can we continue to be moderate and do it with integrity. And so that's kind of the goal now. Like I'm 53, and I've got another 10 years of me in terms of professional life. DA's office, you take that one term at a time. I never take that for granted. But you think about the change in the workplace with different generations, and it's a hard thing for an older guy to kind of be able to have perspective and realize, okay, what's the next generation really going to need to make sure that the foundations are kept in place. We can never get away from the foundations. We spent so much time talking about what those foundations are. In my opinion, based on our constitutions, those things can never be tinkered with. There can be modification within that. So my idea is, how do we make sure the next generation doesn't just think that this blueprint for our system can just be wadded up and tossed aside and we can come up with a new one? It's just not going to work. So that's kind of going forward of what I think about. But no, I mean, everything else is, it's a great job. I mean, we have ups and downs. The fires in this county have been a challenge.
Yeah.
That really concerns people. Again, the homeless issue, that's on us now with Prop 36. Really, the ball's on our court. And so I think it's on those of us who are fortunate enough to be in the system to not go, oh, we got a victory. Now let's just, move on. We can't move on. This is critical. This is really critical. And I think you guys know it. Law enforcement knows it too.
Yeah. It has to be done right.
Has to be done right, or it rightfully so. In 3 or 4 years, people are going to go, what? You guys ask everybody to pitch in on this?
And you fumbled.
Yeah, exactly. So that's it.
I would love to have you back at another time, because I know there's things that we didn't talk about in terms of, I know even with us and our members, the funding for the courts and access to justice, I think that's super important too.
Yeah.
But I would love to have you back. We can touch those other topics, but I'm so grateful for your time today.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate it, Lolita. It's been an honor to be here. I always enjoy talking to you and these issues, and your guys' perspective helps me think about in a broader term what it is, and just to have this opportunity to give people hopefully an insight on more of what we do on our side of the shop. I hope it's helpful to your members, but I hope it's helpful to the general public. So thanks for the opportunity.